Why are we concerned with
Never seen you before in my life.
Oh, look,
See there? See there?
On Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu criticized the Obama administration for not doing enough to forestall Iran's progress toward developing nuclear weapons, for not establishing what he called a clear red line that if Iran were to cross, would prompt the U.S. to make a military strike. So at this crossroads, how would your candidate slow Iran's nuclear weapon progress? And Alan talked about that in his introduction, so.
Well, I'll just add a few things so that Noah can have a little bit more time to respond to that. I would just point out on the Egypt Day point quickly that none other than Senator McCain this morning, I saw him on Morning Joe on MSNBC, and he said we need to continue to support the development of democracy in Egypt, and that means continuing their foreign aid package. Now, let me talk about Iran for a moment. Look, what Secretary Clinton said that Prime Minister Netanyahu reacted to was that the United States was not going to set a deadline, a time deadline, by which it would take military action. She did not say that the United States did not have red lines past which Iran could not cross without expecting a response from the United States. The President of the United States has said repeatedly that we do have a red line. Containment is not our policy. We will prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Now, I don't think it's in our strategic interest to telegraph to Iran exactly when, where, and how we will eliminate their ability to have a nuclear weapon if, in fact, we have to take action beyond our sanctions. I think the element of uncertainty and surprise plays in our favor, rather than giving them a roadmap as to how close they can get to the line before they cross it and they suffer the consequences. So I think there is a strategic difference in how to approach this. Now, I would point out that after the public speech that the Prime Minister gave on Tuesday, he, the President, spent an hour talking on the phone on Tuesday night, and each of them released a readout of that conversation indicating that they were going to continue to work together to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons capability. And I'm not privy to those conversations because that one occurred just between the two of them. But I can tell you that there's an enormous amount of security, coordination, and cooperation, and that a great deal of it is centered on the threat to Israel and to the United States that arises from Iran.
Thank you, Alan. So, Noah?
This is an area where I think there's some very clear contrasts, and in which the critique of the way that Obama has handled it, I think, is fairly straightforward. What President Obama, the reason there's been this flare-up over the past week is because President Obama, his bottom line to Israel is, you're just going to have to trust me. I'm not going to let the Iranians go nuclear. And Obama does have a bit of a red line, and his red line is, he says, we will not allow the Iranians to possess a nuclear weapon. This is different than the what the Israelis view as being safe for their security. Because what the Obama position would allow the Iranians to do is essentially enrich uranium and work on their weapons delivery program, building long-range rockets and things like that, up to the point where they could break out and possess a nuclear weapon in a very, very short period of time, a matter of weeks or a month or two. And what people like Leon Panetta say is, our intelligence is so good that we would know if the Iranians were about to do that. I think if you look back at the history of Pakistan, North Korea, other instances, our intelligence is not that good, and once you create that, once you create this policy, you end up giving the intelligence community incredible incentives to essentially stop paying attention to this threat, because of course, if they do cross that red line, it means we're triggered to go into action. And so, part of this big flare-up that's happened is that the Obama red line is not really acceptable to the Israelis, and they're considering whether to take action on their own. And they are getting a very clear red light from Obama. Obama is saying to them, sorry you don't find my policy acceptable, but I'm going to attempt to deter you from protecting your own national security. And so we have we've reached this point that's almost ironic in that Obama is asking Netanyahu to simply trust him. when Obama has spent the past few years really doing a lot to erode trust between the two leaders and between the two countries. I think from a Romney administration, you would see, first of all, I think you would see less loopholes and sanctions. There's a lot of waivers and loopholes that are being provided in the course of these sanctions that allow a lot of Iran to do a lot of business with people. I think you would definitely have a more credible military threat. One of the things that Netanyahu and that Romney and that a lot of foreign policy people from both parties say is that one of the ways to prevent the need for military action is to make it abundantly clear to the Iranians that they either have to give up the nuclear program or it will be destroyed in military space. Obama doesn't really do that. I mean, he makes this sort of perfunctory remark about, well, all options are on the table. But the moment you're trying to get him beyond anything other than this sort of platitudinous talk about sanctions and diplomacy, you realize that there's no real substance to the policy. And there's no real timetable here. I mean, he's been doing these negotiations now off and on for almost 4 years. And they produce nothing, and the Iranians are getting closer and closer, and the Israelis are completely freaked out. They are very, very scared that the Iranians are nearing a point where their nuclear program will be invulnerable to Israeli attack, and Israel will not be able to defend itself and take care of its own national security, which has always been the most fundamental basic doctrine of Israeli national security, is that Israel protects itself by itself. It doesn't rely on other people. American soldiers have never had to deploy to the Middle East to defend Israel. And they don't want that to happen in the future. And unfortunately, Obama is basically putting them in a place where they're going to have to rely on the tender mercies of Barack Obama. And I don't know, I mean, if you put yourself in the position of Bibi Netanyahu and you look at the way that Obama has handled Israel over the past 4 years, do you really believe that he would launch an attack on Iran? I wouldn't. I don't think Obama would. I don't think he would ever take military action. Remember, there was a lot of promises in the past about Pakistan's program and North Korea's program. This is a bipartisan problem. Everyone talks a tough game, but when it comes down to actually doing something, they don't do anything. So that's the real nature of the Israeli concern, and it's a lesson, it should be a lesson for Obama in why you do not have a poisonous relationship with one of your closest allies, because you actually need that friendship in the future. You need there to be trust between the two parties, and right now there's very little trust, and it's a huge problem.
If you look at what Deputy Foreign Minister Ayalon says, if you look at what Prime Minister Netanyahu says, if you look at what Defense Minister Barak says, if you look at what President Peres said, this relationship is far from poisonous. And I think it does nobody any good to describe it in that way. Now, I'll say this. I find it deeply ironic that Noah argues that the history of bad intelligence by the United States with respect to the Middle East argues for us being more aggressive with respect to Iran. Because the primary example of that was when we thought that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and we got in a war for 10 years. That doesn't mean that you don't trust American intelligence. But it means that you're thoughtful, you're careful, you don't pull the trigger too quickly, and you're sensible in the way you approach world problems. Because if we have to attack Iran, it's not going to be simple. This is not like the attack on the Ozark reactor in Iraq, where you can make one air run and be done with it. Every military expert who's looked at this says you're going to need to bomb for week after week after week. And I read a report this morning from an Israeli officer who said you're going to have troops on the ground in order to clean this mess up at the end. Now, it may be necessary. And we may have to put young Americans and perhaps young Israeli lives at stake in order to do that, because the alternative is worse. We're going to do it after we're thoughtful. And as for trust between the United States and Israel, I personally find it remarkable that based on the long, bipartisan, strong relationship between Israel and the United States, that the Prime Minister of Israel really thinks that he should have any doubts about the word of the President of the United States of America. And I don't care whether that President is George W. Bush, or Ronald Reagan, or Bill Clinton, or President Barack Obama. Not Obama, President Barack Obama. He speaks for our country, and if he makes a guarantee to the Israelis, you can darn well be sure that it will be lived up to.